Hi, I'm Rebecca Owen, and I'm back today with another at-home activity for our young historians. Now, this week on social media, we are going to be posting all about sewing and clothing. And so today, I'll be demonstrating for you some simple sewing stitches that the English colonists would have used in their sewing projects 400 years ago. And I'll be teaching you how to practice them using simple materials that anyone can find in their own home. So, first, take a look at what you're wearing right now. Chances are it was probably made using help from a machine, either a sewing machine or an electric loom in a factory somewhere. Well, 400 years ago, the English colonists in Virginia didn't have sewing machines. Every single article of clothing that they wore had to be sewn by hand. Now, this is something that would take a lot of time and skill. So we're going to be putting our skills to the test today, and you'll have the chance to see if you think it's easy or hard to do these same sewing stitches that the English colonists would have. And parents, so that you're aware, practicing sewing at home is an excellent way for children to continue developing their fine motor skills, which aid in activities that they need for school, like writing, cutting with scissors, really anything that requires small, precise movements with the muscles in the hand or the wrist. So first, let's talk about materials. Even if you don't have a dedicated sewing or craft kit at home, chances are you may still have a needle and thread hanging out somewhere. For example, I got a little thing like this here. This has been gathering dust in my junk drawer. I think I picked it up at a hotel somewhere, but it's just a little emergency sewing kit that comes with a needle, some different colored pieces of thread, and even a couple buttons. So if you have one of these and want to give it a whirl, you are more than welcome to. You can practice sewing into something like an old t-shirt or an old pillowcase if your parents give you permission. You don't need to go out and get any special fabric to practice on. But needles like the ones that come in these kits are very, very small, and you need very fine, skinny thread to use on them, which can be tricky if you're just starting out practicing sewing for the first time. So an alternative is something like this. This is a tapestry needle. They come in plastic or metal, and they're a lot bigger, a lot easier to use. You can even use yarn because the holes are big enough. The eye of the needle is big enough for yarn to fit through. If you do use a tapestry needle, though, the material that you choose to sew on will have to have a much more open weave, something like this burlap here. You'll need something that the larger needle can fit through easily. You won't be able to poke this kind of needle through a t-shirt or a pillowcase or anything like that. But you may not have these materials at home, and that's okay. We're stuck at home for the time being, and it's not necessarily the easiest thing or even the safest thing to go and make a trip to your local craft store. And this got me thinking about the colonists who were here in Virginia hundreds of years ago. If they needed materials for a project that they were doing, they either had to wait for a supply ship to come from England with the materials they needed, but that could take months and months of time, or they had to look around in the world around them and see what they could find to make do. And that's what we're going to be doing today. And that's how I'll be showing you how to do some sewing. All you need are a few simple materials. Cardboard. I have a thin piece of cardboard here. This is the kind of cardboard that you might find on a cereal box or the box that comes with a case of soda. I actually got this from my cat Marley's box of wet cat food. You may have seen Marley in my previous post about the John White paintings. You'll also need some yarn or thread, and if you don't have that, you can use an old shoelace. I just pulled this off of a pair of sneakers that are about to fall apart, but you may want to get out your snow boots or your winter boots. We're not using them anymore now that it's so warm outside, so this is the perfect tool for the job. Something that is helpful but is not necessarily required is a hole punch. I used my hole punch to punch some evenly spaced holes along my cardboard here. If you don't have a hole punch at home, that's fine. Your parents can help you use some sharp scissors to poke holes in your cardboard. Now, to get started, we're going to be learning 3 simple stitches. The first stitch is the whip stitch, and the whip stitch can be used to quickly and easily sew 2 pieces of fabric together. So I have my example here. I have my piece of cardboard. I actually have 2 pieces of cardboard, and I taped them together just so that they don't slip and slide while I'm trying to sew through them. Normally, when you start a sewing project, you'll want to put a knot in the end of whatever thread or yarn that you're using. But because we've punched holes in our cardboard, it's gonna take a really big knot in your string. So instead, I just taped my yarn to the back of the cardboard to keep it from pulling through. Now, to start the whip stitch, you wanna make sure that your 2 pieces of fabric, or cardboard in our case, are lined up. And we're gonna start from the back. I have my thread here. I reinforced it with a little piece of tape, similar to the end of a shoelace. This little piece, the plasticky piece on the end, that's called an aglet. But I reinforced my thread with tape just to keep it from fraying and to give me something to hold on to. So for the whip stitch, we're gonna start by poking our thread or our yarn through the back. I'm gonna pick a hole that's close to the end of my cardboard. I'm gonna go in through the back and grab and pull all the way through until I can't pull anymore. Now, the next step is really simple. All I do is flip my yarn around and poke through the next hole, going in from the back again. Every single time, I'm just whipping my yarn around and poking through from the back. It's really easy. This stitch goes really quick. It doesn't take a lot of skill, and it's pretty simple to do. So I'm just gonna keep whipping around and going in through the back every single time until I get to the end of my fabric, or cardboard in this case. And once I get to the end, let's see, I'll untape my pieces here. You can see how now my 2 pieces of cardboard have been sewn together. So that's the whip stitch. The next stitch that we're going to learn, this is called the running stitch. And this is a really basic, really simple stitch. It's one of the first stitches that I ever learned when I was learning how to sew a long, long time ago. The running stitch is good for seams on clothing. That's the edges of clothing, seams that don't get a lot of wear and tear. You can also use the running stitch to sew on a patch or some trim, maybe some lace onto the edges of your clothing, simple things like that. So again, I'm starting off, I have my string taped to the back because I can't knot it. It's just gonna go through the holes here. And just like with the whip stitch, I'm gonna start by going in through the back of my cardboard. Now, once I've pulled my string through, I can't get it to go any farther. Instead of whipping around and going back again through the back like the whip stitch, we are going to take our string, move to the next hole over, and go in through the front. It's as simple as that. You have completed your very first stitch. Now, to continue on with the running stitch, you're going to, again, go in through the back, pull through as far as you can, and then poke through the front. And you're gonna be continuing with this back to front pattern of sewing until you get to the end. Back to front, back to front. And you end up with stitches like this that have a little bit of space in between each one. Running stitch completed. Now, the final stitch that I want to teach you today, this is called the back stitch. And it's very similar to the running stitch in that it can be used for seams or hems on clothing, but this one is a very strong stitch, and it's something that can be used for those hems or seams that get a lot of wear and tear. So to start off, we're going to begin just like we did with the previous stitch, the running stitch. We're going to enter from the back of our fabric, pull all the way through, and we're going to make our first stitch just like we did with the running stitch. We're going to then poke through the front and pull tight. We have our first stitch made. Now, I'm going to then start again from the back, poke through. Now this time, when I get to this point, instead of making another stitch by entering through the front in this hole, I'm going to double back on myself. I'm going to go backwards and go back through the very last hole from the previous stitch, this one right here. I'm going to go back on myself like that. So now there's no space in between the two stitches that I just created. Now, to get started with my next stitch, I'm not going to enter through this one right here. This one, see right here, that's the end of my stitch that I just made. I'm going to enter through the back of my cardboard into this hole right here, this one that's empty, that doesn't have any thread in it so far. Now again, just like I did before, I'm going to double back and poke my thread through the hole that has the very last stitch that I just made. So I'm going to poke it through. There we go. Again, now we have 3 stitches completed with no space in between. And then I'm just going to keep going following that same pattern. I go down to the next available completely empty hole in my cardboard, poke my needle or my thread through from the back, double back on myself to the end of the previous stitch, and poke through. And it's as simple as that. And I'm going to keep following the same pattern until I get to the very end. Now, once you feel like you've mastered the 3 stitches that I've taught you today on cardboard, if you have fabric and want to give it a try at home, you can. Or you can even draw a picture on your cardboard and punch holes along the edges of the picture and practice sewing different shapes or designs that way. So I have something that I created using my 3 stitches on my burlap, and I have my whip stitch around the edge here in this dark blue. I have used my running stitch in the green. You can see the teeny tiny little spaces. It's a pretty tight running stitch right here. And then I used the back stitch to write the words happy sewing. So you can see there's no space in between the stitches on my letters. And the fun thing about learning these stitches is that once you've perfected them, you feel like an expert, you can start working on sewing in different shapes and designs, even letters. So we hope you give this a shot today with the materials that you have at home. If you'd like to see a written tutorial, we'll post that here along with this video, and it will show you with instructions how to complete these stitches so you can learn at your own pace. I hope you had fun and learned something today, and we hope to see your sewing projects that you complete. And be on the lookout later this week for other videos posted by my friends here at Henricus, where they will show you the clothing that they are creating that looks just like the clothing that the English colonists would have worn 400 years ago.